you can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, play the news from The Australian.
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, July 19. Mining billionaire Andrew Forrest says Labor should push ahead with billions in tax incentives for green hydrogen, even though he's dramatically scaling back his own investment. Forrest says high energy costs must come down to make green hydrogen a viable fuel source. An exclusive on theaustralian.com.au right now. Defence and Veterans Affairs ignored mounting evidence of chronic brain injuries in soldiers caused by repeated exposure to blast pressure waves. The injuries, which have been linked to suicides, are common in Special Forces personnel. It just became a little easier to become an author. The Australian's launching a brand new literary prize worth $35,000 and a book deal. Today, why TikTok is changing the way books are consumed and who gets to write. Writing a good book used to be the first step for getting a publishing deal, but in today's market, that doesn't always cut it. So, how are new writers getting noticed? TikTok.
So I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and the one thing that got me through that was journaling. So when I heard of the term shadow work, that was the missing puzzle piece. That gave a name to this introspective work that I was already doing in my journal. That's when I decided to create the Shadow Work Journal, and it's had immense online praise and it's reached millions of people. It's incredible to see how many people have resonated with this work.
That's Kayla Shaheen. She's in her mid-20s and she's the author of the Shadow Work Journal. It's a fill-in-the-blanks self-improvement book. Thanks to TikTok, Shaheen has sold more than 1 million copies of this journal. She's now got a 5-book deal and a 7-figure advance with Simon & Schuster. When she has a new book to sell, Shaheen hops on TikTok.
Good things will come your way if you make room for them. Lucky Girl Syndrome is so real. Lucky Girl Syndrome is like a 2-part method. Taking control of your self-concept, the mental image that you have of yourself.
Social media can be great for book sales, but a genius author doesn't always make a good influencer. Take Patrick White, a literary giant and a famously prickly recluse. Here he is after winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1973.
Mr. White, first of all, congratulations. How does it feel?
Oh, rather bewildering. I've had my door battered on half the night by the press, and I'd taken a sleeping pill and gone to bed.
That's a strange way to celebrate such an honour.
I get up very early. I'd had a very hard day and I wanted some sleep.
If White was writing for the first time today and needed a popular TikTok account to be published and promote his books, would the world have read his work?
Well, I'm not writing at this moment, but my publisher has another book. And I'm preparing to write another one.
Can I ask what about?
No.
Perhaps not.
Being a writer in Australia is incredibly tough. We know that. It's really hard to be published. And I think a lot of the time, bookshops and the culture in which we live encourages writers from overseas.
That's Caroline Overington. She's the literary editor at The Australian, and she's also one of the judges at the Australian Fiction Prize, the country's newest competition for authors. Caroline loves books that share unique Australian voices, but a sometimes risk-averse publishing industry can make it hard for talented new writers to be discovered.
There are a handful of major publishing companies and they have to make decisions based on what they think will sell. So, for example, if a vampire book takes off, suddenly you'll see 20 vampire books. But then if you come along with a book that doesn't quite fit into what they're looking for, you might miss out, even though what you've written is very good.
And if you do get a deal, literary riches await. Or not. The average income for a literary fiction author is just $15,400, according to the most recent survey by Creative Australia. That's the government's advisory body for the arts. If you adjust for inflation, the people pouring their souls into print are making less now than they were a decade ago.
Some people will earn enough to make a living. It depends what you want from your book. A lot of people will say to me, I do it for the love of it. It's a labour of love. I mean, don't do it just to make your fortune. I mean, absolutely, it is possible to make a living in Australia as a writer. Not everyone is going to make the top 10. The top 10 is the top 10 because there's only 10. So, not everyone's going to have a huge success. But I know some people, they just want to write their book. Like they have a book, that they have something that they want to say about life in Australia.
If TikTok terrifies you, there's now another way to get an unpublished manuscript into the world.
It's called the Australian Fiction Prize. We're incredibly excited about it. We're in partnership with HarperCollins. HarperCollins being one of the major publishing houses in Australia, arguably the number one publishing house in Australia. And the great thing about this prize is it is open to all Australian storytellers who are writing fiction. There's no age limit on it. You don't have to be a debut writer. And one of the other very exciting things about it that sets it apart, I think, from other prizes is that your book, if successful, will be published, meaning you'll be able to find it on the shelves alongside other HarperCollins writers like Trent Dalton and Julia Baird and Dervla McTernan and other great crime writers like that. You'll be able to go into bookshops, find your book. Hopefully you'll get invited to a few writers' festivals as well and join that whole experience of being a published writer.
And there's a $20,000 cash prize plus a $15,000 advance.
We have great storytellers in this country, and we always have had. We've had a storytelling culture here, arguably for 60,000 years. So it's something we really want to promote, the idea of an Australian voice telling Australian stories.
Coming up, publishing loves a cancellation. So who's allowed to write what these days? The Australian's books coverage is unrivalled in our beloved review section every Saturday and 24/7 at theaustralian.com.au. We have author interviews, poetry, reviews and much more. We'll be back after this break. If there's a book bursting to get out of you, the inaugural Australian Fiction Prize is looking for entries. It has to be fiction, but it doesn't need to tick any particular boxes about theme or identity.
Certainly we would like the winner of this prize to be a book that many people read and enjoy. We won't be selecting, I think, a book just because of its worthiness. We would like to be able to select something that is a really ripping read as well.
Perhaps one of the hottest ongoing debates in the literary world is whether or not an author should write about marginalised characters if they themselves are not from those communities. In recent years, Australian author Thomas Keneally apologised for assuming an Aboriginal voice in his Booker Prize-nominated 1972 novel The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. He said he would not write that book today. And then there's Helen Demidenko. She was a 23-year-old Ukrainian Australian fond of folk dances and traditional costumes when she unleashed a culture war. Demidenko wrote a manuscript which won the Vogel Literary Award in 1994 and the Miles Franklin in 1995.
In winning the Miles Franklin Award, Ms Demidenko joins an illustrious list of Australian authors: Patrick White, Thomas Keneally, Peter Carey and Tim.
And then it was revealed she was not actually Ukrainian at all. Her book, The Hand That Signed the Paper, told the story of Ukrainian characters, who she claimed were based on family members participating in Nazi death squads and themselves being persecuted by Jewish communists. The book had already prompted accusations of anti-Semitism, and then it turned out Demidenko's name was really Helen Darville, and her parents were from Scunthorpe in northern England. She claimed the whole thing, including the folk dancing, wasn't a fraud, it was a clever marketing ploy. So, setting clever marketing ploys aside, is it okay to write about things you haven't personally experienced or to adopt the identity of someone else?
You cannot put the shackles on writers. You just can't. And I know that there are some people who say, oh, well, you have to stay in your lane, or you can't write a character with a disability unless you have that disability yourself. You can't write a character who is same-sex attracted unless you are yourself gay. That is absolute and utter nonsense. So I will never be the kind of person, I will never be the kind of critic that says, oh, this book didn't work because the writer should not have been allowed to write it. Anyone can write anything at any time for any reason, and may you be judged on how well you pull it off. My advice to young writers would be to tell the story you want to tell, and don't be cowed by some of the criticism out there in the wider market, because for sure there is a lot of pressure on people not to write certain things, not to hold certain points of view, not to be agitating for certain groups of people. And I think that all of that is nonsense. You write what is in your heart, and you write what you want the world to know. Let your light shine as brightly as you can, because that's what the world needs from you. It doesn't need the same story that everyone else is telling. And it doesn't need you to live in some kind of metaphorical cage where you're frightened to say what you think or what you feel or what you see or how you've experienced things. Go out there and tell the best story you can tell.
Caroline Overington is The Australian's literary editor. The Australian Fiction Prize is open until August 2, and you can find it by searching Australian Fiction Prize. For the best coverage of the arts in Australia and breaking news around the nation, join our subscribers now at theaustralian.com.au. Thanks for joining us on The Front. Our team is Joshua Burton, Kristen Amiot, Stephanie Coombs, Tiffany Dimmack, Jasper Leake, Leah Tamaglu and me, Claire Harvey.